Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. The whole energy industry is very complicated. A lot of people think that, well, we should go 100% renewables. Other people are saying we need a transition. I'm talking to Meredith Angwin, who's an author and energy analyst. Meredith has done a ton of research in order to understand how our electrical grid needs to be more resilient, what that would look like, what elements it includes, and how we might go about getting there. So stay tuned as I talk to Meredith about some of these complicated issues and how there are solutions. Hi, Meredith. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, it's great to see you. So before we get started on our topic, can you talk to the viewers just a little bit about your background?
Oh, yeah, I always wanted to be a scientist, and I decided to be a chemist. And then I decided I was interested in energy. Actually, what I was interested in is air pollution. I grew up in Chicago at a time when the city was very coal-centric. And I got some research jobs on pollution control as I got older, when I got out of school, and that was really great for me. And after a while, I began working a lot with the electric industry, and then I realized that there was bigger issues than one power plant or another power plant. There was the issue of how the whole grid is managed, and that's what my latest book is about.
So, we're talking today a little bit about that grid piece, because when you look at a lot of communities, a lot of them don't think about some of these issues until it's too late, till a disaster's happened, and then it even magnifies the disaster more. And so can you talk a little bit about proactive steps communities can do in advance of anything happening when it comes to their grid? What are the types of things they should be looking at?
Well, one thing I think that communities should look at and kind of push back against is that there's this push nowadays to have renewables, which go on and off when they choose to, and to have those renewables backed up by natural gas. Now, the thing about natural gas is that it's delivered in pipelines, and it isn't stored at the plant. If there's an interruption in the pipeline delivery, the whole grid can be affected by it. You really don't want to see your grid going to 50% or more natural gas. And I think that's something people don't think about, because they think, well, it's cleaner than coal. And I grew up in Chicago, and it is cleaner than coal. That doesn't mean that you want to have your grid completely dependent on it, because it's just-in-time delivery, to be blunt. And if just-in-time doesn't work, then what do you do? So if you happen to live in such an area, I suggest that you have some kind of a backup battery system at your place, at least to keep essential things going. Everybody can do well with a 1-hour outage. The question is, how are you going to do with a 2-day outage if a compressor goes down? And it's just not something that people want to think about much, to be honest, but they need to think about it. As I say, the biggest issue that I see on the grid is overdependence on renewables plus natural gas, which are not something that you can absolutely count on.
And I think this discussion is really important, because I think people see this whole area as very simplistic. It's just like, well, let's just turn to renewables, without the understanding of how complex this system is and how there's a big solution. It's not just one solution. I mean, I think and that's why it's so important to have these kinds of discussions, to say, yes, that is a component, but we also must consider this and other. I know one of the things you've spoken on nuclear energy. And so, talk a little bit about the solution that we should all be looking at, that it's not so, fine or put your blinders on and say, this is the be all end all. I think we have to talk about all these various components. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, yes, I'm very much in favor of nuclear energy. Now, when I started working in the electric utilities, I was very much in favor of renewables, and I thought they could do everything. Unfortunately, I was wrong, and it took me a while to figure that out. But and the thing is that they can't, because they turn on and off when they want to, and so they're always a backup. There was a big study that showed that for every 1 megawatt of renewables such as wind or solar that you put on your system, you have to have 1.1 megawatts installed of fast-acting fossil fuel, usually fast-acting backup. And the only fast-acting backup you can have is either natural gas. Hydro comes on very quickly too, but if you build more renewables, you're not likely to be able to build more hydro. Building more hydro is a very difficult thing. You have to have you can't build it in flat country. You need a canyon for it, so basically that's one thing. No, people give nuclear energy a really bad rap, and I really dislike that, because nuclear energy is the only form of energy that people are trying to project into the future, these awful things. So, for example, let's say there was a explosion at a gas-fired plant, which there actually was in Connecticut a few years ago, and 10 people died. Okay. That will be described as 10 people died at a gas plant explosion. They will not go on to say, and because there was a huge fire and a lot of people were breathing smoke, we can expect a bunch of lung cancers in the future. But for nuclear, nobody gets hurt in the original accident, and then they're like, oh boy, but you have to understand that we can project, and anyway, so it really bothers me, because they make these unfair comparisons. You see what I'm saying? They say, I looked at the fires in the West and the cities blanketed in smoke, and I thought, oh man, if it was a nuclear plant, they'd be projecting how many lung cancer and breast cancers will be lung cancer, bladder cancer, and breast cancers might be caused by this. But they're not going to do that, because they scare people. The only people you're only allowed to scare people about nuclear plants. Anyway, but moving on from that, I want to give a different example, and this is why I'm interested in grid governance. So. I live in Vermont. It gets very cold in the winter, and we have been going to more and more gas-fired plants and closing coal plants, and unfortunately also closing nuclear plants. And so all of these gas-fired plants. Well, one of the problems is, in cold weather, the gas is preferential for home heating. If it's needed for home heating and it's needed for a power plant, home heating is going to get it. That's just how it's set up, because they figure the people at home don't have a lot of options. Well, maybe the power plant can do something about it. I mean, after all, it's a power plant. It's got staff. It's got, suppliers. It's got, So what happened was that our local grid operator put in place something called the Winter Reliability Program, and said, okay, we've got way too many gas-fired power plants. They're not going to be able to get gas in a minus 10 below cold snap, which happens here. It does happen. It's not unheard of for Vermont and New Hampshire to have minus 10 below cold snaps. And so we're going to pay the power plants to store oil on site. Many of them are what's called dual fired. They can burn natural gas, or they can burn oil. And so that worked. And at one point during a cold snap, our grid was 30% running on oil that was stored on site because of the foresight of a grid operator. Well, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission said, you must stop that program. You cannot continue that program. It is not a program we will allow, because you're choosing one fuel over another. You're choosing to store oil. Now, it turns out different fuels have different characteristics, And oil you can store at the power plant. Natural gas, not so easy. There is natural gas stored in caverns, but power plants just get it delivered through a pipeline. They don't have big, huge storage there. It would really be not likely, very expensive, and the neighbors probably wouldn't like it if the power plant is near an urban area. To have a big bubble of natural gas and thing. Anyway, so that's the kind of grid management issue that I've been trying to deal with. I think that we have to get away from this idea that all fuels have to be treated equally. All fuels have to be treated in a way where they lead to a resilient grid. They lead to a grid that's there and reliable. If you have natural gas plants and you are going to have a time when natural gas is going to be diverted into houses, yes, they have to store oil on site. Either that or you have to have a lower percentage of natural gas plants so there's enough natural gas for the houses and whatever plants you have. So anyway, that is what I've been thinking of. And nobody thinks about it. They're just like, we're going to do 100% renewables. And well, no, that actually doesn't work. I wish it worked. I mean, I like I said, I spent years in the renewable group at the Electric Power Research Institute wishing it worked.
But wishing doesn't change things.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
I think that's great. Because I find the discussion right now in the public domain very polarized. It's just either you are all renewable or you're anti, you're working against everything. You're a climate change denier. And I just think that we need to have discussions like this. We need to have people like yourself putting out content that is objective, it's based in science, and it's realistic, it's practical. It's not kind of just an idea that can't be implemented. Yes, we all want it to, we all wish that renewables worked 100% of the time, but until they do, we need to transition and move towards, better electric grid systems. You're talking about governance. All of these issues that you're highlighting are really important.
Oh, thank you. I really wanted to, because I felt like everybody just had some sort of talking point, like CO2 isn't actually all that bad, or renewables will do it all. And I mean, no. Let's start with, we want a reliable grid. And the next step is we want a clean grid without a lot of air pollution. And from there we can go on to what else would we like in a grid. But let's start with a reliable big grid and a clean grid without a lot of air pollution. I mean, I at least that's my feeling about it. And that we have to push for those things because there are a lot of factors that are pushing the other way. The polarization and if you try to find out in many areas of the country how the grid is actually governed, you're not allowed into the meetings. Reporters aren't allowed into the meetings. So so we need to push for transparency. We need to push for a prioritization. You see what I'm saying? Of reliability, cleanliness, and whatever else we want.
Yeah, and there's a politicization of this issue as well. So, if you could get rid of the agendas and the politics and, and what everybody's working towards and really say what makes sense, what is logical, what is realistic. We all have the same goals in mind. None of us want to increase air pollution, but you're right. We do want a reliable, safe, efficient energy system. I'm just curious. So I don't know when did you release your recent book?
In October, mid-October, actually.
of 2020. And
as up to date as it can be. You have to understand that they're constantly bringing new, I was telling you about FERC turned down the winter reliability program. Well, they haven't really come up with a substitute yet that works. And so they're constantly bringing up a new possibility to FERC, and FERC is ruling on it and usually turns it down because they're sort of trying to square a circle by saying it has to work and it has to be fuel neutral too. And you can't say this kind of fuel is useful for it. It has to be any fuel. It's just a complete craziness, really, when you think about it.
So given your experience, your knowledge, I'm just curious, if someone watching this, whether they're in the United States or elsewhere, what would your advice be to them if they're in a position that could make a difference in this area, that has some kind of decision-making ability, or what would you say to them?
I would say that they should look at what works as opposed to what they hope will work. So, for example, if you were going to go to, there's a website called, it's pretty straightforward name, electricitymap.org. And what it does is it shows how much CO2 is being produced per kilowatt hour of electricity in various places, various countries. So if you look at that map and you compare Germany, which has gone heavily to renewables, with France, which has gone heavily to nuclear, you're going to see France looking really good compared to Germany, because Germany has to back up those renewables with fossil, and it does. That's the part of the German story that doesn't get told. So if you're in a position to make a difference, look at what's reliable, look at not over-investing in anything that is in all honesty, I wouldn't even like to see 100% nuclear on the grid, and not 100% of anything. You want some resiliency. If something is not going to good, let's say you put wind turbines on the grid, and you say, okay, we got wind turbines, and it's going to be great, and so forth. And then there's some rule that comes down that says, oh, I'm sorry, but wind turbines nowadays have to have some noise abatement stuff. Well, maybe all your wind turbines have to go offline for a while. I mean, so you don't, no matter what thing you're in favor of, it shouldn't be 100% of the grid. And hopefully you have a large portion of the grid that is not just-in-time delivery like natural gas.
Well, and that's great advice. Is there anything else before we wrap up that perhaps I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention?
Oh, I could talk for another 4 hours, but I don't think that is exactly what you were asking me. I'm just going to give a little pitch for my book, because I worked very hard on it. And there's a man who's writing another book about the grid. And he said to me, the information in your book, I can't get it anywhere else. It's only in your book. And I mean, it isn't only in my book in the sense that if you subscribe to RTO Insider Magazine, Power Magazine, and Utility Dive, and you also follow your grid operator's website very carefully, you could find out this stuff, but you can't really find it very much in another book. So I would say that I want to say that my book is available on Amazon, Shorting the Grid.
Well, and so that's great. Well, I appreciate being able, even though this is just a brief interview, just to be able to talk to you about the fact that we do need to be open. We do need to think these are not simple issues. There's many, many facets. And someone like yourself who has been in the industry, who understands, yes, this is part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. Yes. I think that's very important. So thank you, Meredith, for spending a few minutes today to talk about this, and I will put the link to your book below so people can find out more, and hopefully your voice will become one that's louder in the future, so we can really talk about these issues and make sensible decisions in the future.
Thank you so much. I certainly hope so, and thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.